Welcome to Classroom Quest K12, where the art of teaching embarks on an epic gaming adventure. I'm your host, Stephanie Segroves, bringing over a decade of teaching experience to this educational quest. This podcast is a rallying point for educators, combining the thrill of gaming with transformative teaching strategies. Here we use the Mastery Gamification Methodology to overcome student apathy and engage students in their own hero journey. So grab a cup of coffee and get ready, because you and I are about to launch our quest. Hey teacher friend, I'm glad you're here, and thank you for tuning into Classroom Quest K12 today. Today we're going to take an exciting look at the research behind the Mastery Gamification Methodology and how to leverage it to overcome student apathy. So, how many educators listening want students who think? Who want students who take responsibility for their own education? Students who learn to be successful in life and in school? Students who keep trying until they get it? Well, I think we'd all be lying if we said we didn't want students like that. But then the next question is, what systems do we have in place to teach students to think? What systems do we have in place to teach students to take responsibility for their own education? What systems do we have in place to teach students to be successful in school and in life? What systems do we have in place that teach students to keep trying until they get it? Any educator worth their salt believes, with enough time, effort, and support, anyone can learn anything. But what systems do we have in place that support this belief? So despite these very deeply held teacher beliefs, many students do not learn to think. Few students take responsibility for their own education. Many students never learn to be successful in school and life. And rarely do students keep trying until they get it. Many teachers say that student apathy is at an all-time high, that it's harder and harder to engage students in school tasks, and even harder to get top quality work. So the systems we have in place. Well, Stephanie, what about grades and rating systems? That's what we have. And I mean, sure, this works for some students, but the kids who go for the A are already the high achievers who are taking responsibility for their own education. What about the majority, where grades don't work? And what about the overstressed A student who is only jumping through hoops to get their A without actually learning? What about the anxiety that comes with a system like that? Have you noticed this trend in your classroom? I know I have. There's been a lot of students where they just want to sit, not do much, get their passing grade, move on. And it's frustrating, you know? I really care about my subject. I care about my students, and this isn't what I want for them. Well, if you have noticed this trend in your classroom, it's not your fault. Many educators have fallen victim to the outdated teaching strategies that are so common in our school system. It doesn't matter how hard you work if the tools you've been given are not right for the job. We're going to dive into the research and take a look at some updated teaching strategies that have been proven to work. The Mastery Gamification Methodology is based on 3 research-backed pillars. They are mastery learning, standards-based learning, and gamification. Let's start by giving a quick definition of each. Mastery learning and standards-based learning are nearly the same thing. In fact, many educators use the terms interchangeably, although there are a few subtle differences. Standards-based learning starts with the standards that students should know in each grade or subject, and the assessments are directly based on the standards. The standards used are generally up to the school district, with Common Core standards and state standards being the most commonly used. This ensures that instruction and standards are pretty uniform, and all students receive an equal education. Mastery learning is based on the idea that a student must master each topic taught before moving on to the next. This method not only facilitates thorough understanding, but also plays a key role in how to overcome learned helplessness in the classroom. Students are generally required to meet a minimum mastery level determined ahead of time before moving on to the next topic. This method generally allows students to work at the pace that is right for them and ensures that students understand the fundamentals of this more advanced material. Gamification in education can be harder to define because there's no standard way to implement it in the classroom. However, key elements of the gamification in the classroom include immediate feedback, often in the form of badges to recognize students' accomplishments, and storytelling to engage students in the educational process. Gamification is known for increasing student engagement in the learning process, which is essential in how to overcome student apathy in the classroom. Now that we've clarified the pillars of the Mastery Gamification Methodology, let's take a look at the research behind it and how to use it to help students become more engaged and successful in the classroom. Let's start with a classic that helps us understand student apathy in the first place and why students are so prone to it. Dr. Martin Seligman, psychologist, and Dr. Stephen Maier did a study in 1967 that changed the way we understand apathy. You'll be able to find citations for all these studies that I'm saying at the end in the show notes. In 1967, Dr. Seligman and Dr. Maier did a study involving dogs as their subjects. They put dogs in confined areas and gave them electrical shocks. Some of the dogs had a way to stop the shocks by moving a lever or jumping out of the way, and some dogs did not have a way to stop the shocks. At the beginning of the shocks, all the dogs tried to get away from the shocks. The dogs who had a way to escape it found that way and escaped. But the dogs who did not have a way to escape eventually just got quiet and apathetic. After doing this for a while, they took the same dogs and put them all in individually confined spaces, but this time, all the dogs had a way to escape the shocks. They just had to jump over a low wall. The dogs that had previously had a way to stop the shocks quickly jumped over the wall to escape the shocks. However, the dogs that had previously not had an escape did not even try to escape this time, despite there being an exit. They simply became apathetic and waited for the pain to end. This study was later done on humans, except the humans were exposed to very loud sounds instead of electrical shocks. The results were the same as with the dogs. Those who had a way to stop the pain were able to stop it later, but those who did not have a way to stop the pain eventually just stopped trying, even when a way to stop the pain was introduced. This study spawned the idea of learned helplessness, the idea that after prolonged and uncontrollable negative circumstances, a person stops trying to fix the situation or find a way out, even if a way to fix the circumstance is introduced. They learn to give up on their self-efficacy, and they learn to be helpless. However, in 2016, about 50 years after the initial study, Dr. Seligman and Dr. Maier did a follow-up to their study and uncovered a subtly different conclusion that added to the initial study. The follow-up study concluded that learned helplessness is not actually learned. Rather, it is the default manner in which living beings cope with prolonged, uncontrollable negative circumstances. This emphasizes that many people need to be taught that they have control over their circumstances in order to take control of their circumstances and change them for the better, because it's not a natural default. In short, a person has to believe that they have the ability to change their circumstances in order to actually take the action needed to change their circumstances. So, what does this study have to do with student apathy in the classroom? Let's say that a student comes to school and initially has a hard time with schoolwork. The student is told that they are wrong, that they need to work harder, and they keep receiving F after F after F. You can only get an F, which is an abbreviation for failure, so many times before you start believing that you are a failure. This can easily be seen as prolonged and uncontrollable pain. If the student is simply given Fs and never given the chance to actually learn what he missed, he will likely exhibit student apathy, which is learned helplessness. So what can teachers do about this educational horror? Dr. Bandura, psychologist, has a theory of self-efficacy that may offer some insight. Dr. Bandura's theory of self-efficacy simply refers to the level of belief that a person has in himself to accomplish a specific task. So if a student has self-efficacy, they are more likely to be successful in a particular task. Dr. Bandura's theory cites some ways in which a person can build their self-efficacy. Some of these ways are mastery experiences, vicarious experiences, verbal persuasion, and positive emotional states. The Mastery Gamification Methodology helps students build this sense of self-efficacy by requiring them to have mastery experiences through mastery learning, allowing for vicarious experiences of success by seeing their peers succeed through mastery learning, by verbal persuasion when their accomplishments are celebrated through the badges and immediate feedback of gamification, and by helping students to have a positive emotional state in school because they're actually having fun while they're learning. This research is reinforced by Dr. Carol Dweck and her work with fixed mindset versus growth mindset. Dr. Dweck's work emphasizes that students who have a growth mindset believe that they can develop their skills through effort, support, and persistence. This correlates to Dr. Bandura's theory of self-efficacy. These students believe in their ability to grow and learn, so they do. The other mindset that Dr. Dweck researches is the fixed mindset, which is the belief of students that their intelligence and abilities are unchangeable. These students defeat themselves right from the start because they do not even believe that they can improve. One of the big takeaways from Dr. Dweck is how to give students feedback that promotes a growth mindset. One such study on how to give feedback to students was uncovered in her study, Praise for Intelligence Can Undermine Children's Motivation and Performance. This study emphasized the importance of recognizing student work and effort to encourage a growth mindset. Instead of telling a student, "You're so smart," a better form of feedback would be, "You worked really hard on this." The Mastery Gamification Methodology applies this research in the classroom because it puts a natural system in place that provides positive feedback for student effort and growth. Students receive their badge once they have reached their minimum mastery level, and their hard work is celebrated once they have put in the work required to reach that level. This growth mindset lends itself to a natural transition to Dr. Angela Duckworth, psychologist, and her research on grit. Dr. Duckworth defines grit as passion and perseverance toward long-term goals. In her book, she talks about her studies with both military academies and spelling bee contestants. She found those individuals with higher levels of grit were more likely to succeed. Dr. Duckworth thinks that grit is an even more important factor in success than intelligence or inherent talent. The Mastery Gamification Methodology teaches students how to develop grit by requiring them to keep at a task until they have reached the minimum mastery level. Students are not permitted to simply take the F. They are required to put in the effort until they achieve their success. Can you imagine if students entering school were required to demonstrate grit through mastery learning from a young age? If students simply assumed that school was about working at fun learning tasks until they actually got it? How would that change the mindset of our students? How would that change the mindset of an entire generation? With all this research so far, it's no surprise that we have a final study that documents the success of mastery learning itself. In 1995, Dr. Brian Whiting repeated a study that he had done previously in the 1970s about mastery learning, and he found the same results as he had previously. He followed students through their entire school experience in mastery learning. He found that both student attitudes towards learning and their academic scores were higher than their counterparts who were not in a mastery learning system. It's a system that is documented to work. Here's the study's abstract. It says, this study investigated the cognitive and effective student learning outcomes of 36 semesters, equivalent to 18 years, using the mastery learning approach in high school distributive education classes. Student achievement in the cognitive area is reported by increasing grade point averages, and test scores are presented to show the consistent high level of academic achievement of students. Effective information, attitudes toward school and learning, has also been elicited from the entire sample and is presented to show positive changes. So to summarize, students in a mastery learning system got better grades, achieved more, and they liked school better. Let me read you the powerful introduction of that study. Everyone wants successful schools. Ideas of how to reach this goal range from implementing the newest technology to embracing traditional ways of learning and discipline. But none of these methods seem to alleviate the unfortunately common student experience of frustration and failure. Educators are inundated with miracle cures that promise gains in student productivity without altering their basic approach to teaching. But we know that dramatic improvement cannot come without dramatic change. If educators do not alter their approach to teaching, students cannot improve their learning. If what educators are doing does not work, then they must change what they are doing. Mastery learning is one positive change towards a new way of teaching and ensuring student learning. Research has shown the implementation of mastery learning techniques in the classroom can produce a significantly higher rate of success in all students than previously experienced. This report provides continuing evidence of the efficacy of mastery learning as in previous studies. In conclusion, the benefits of mastery learning have been known for years, but it takes educators who are sick of being inundated with miracle cures that promise gains in student productivity without actual changes to their basic teaching strategies who want change. The Mastery Gamification Methodology promotes students' academic success and the soft skills of grit and perseverance through the pillars of mastery learning, standards-based learning, and in addition, students' positive attitudes towards school and immediate feedback to promote a growth mindset are addressed by the pillar of gamification. So now that we've gone through the research of the Mastery Gamification Methodology and why it works, I'd like to tell you a little bit about how I'm gamifying my Spanish 2 classroom right now. So I'm probably going to be working on Spanish 2 for a while. It takes a minute to get all this together, but once you have it 1 year, you just keep using the same stuff. So I've been working on the overall story arc of my class, and I've decided that my students will become guardianes del tiempo, guardians of time. We start with students studying San Juan de la Cruz, a Spanish mystic who stood up for religious rights and he was persecuted for it. San Juan de la Cruz will send my students through time as guardianes del tiempo to right the wrongs of the past. The first time we are going to is the Mexican Revolution. I'm calling it Shards of History, the Guardian's Quest. But my students will not be alone. Last podcast, I introduced you to Astrid, who is a luminary. She is born of the stars but walks among humans. She is the companion of my students in this quest through time. In combining these elements of fantasy and history, students are able to think about history as a story. Stories are much easier to remember than just dates and facts. In this way, history becomes alive to my students. Well, teacher friend, it's about time to wrap up this episode. But before we go, let me leave you with this thought. Empowered teachers empower students, and empowered students learn. I hope this episode is leaving you a little more empowered with the skills needed in the classroom. And if you want to schedule a meeting with me to see how we could customize the Mastery Gamification Methodology to your grade and curriculum, find me at my Facebook, Instagram, or my website, and I'd love to help you level up your classroom and help you engage your students. Thanks for listening. See you next time.